Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into some pretty complex research documents from an author named Jonathan. And what he alleges is, well, it's a lot. He claims there's this hidden network that connects the very top of finance, tech, and even major world events. So our goal here is to simply walk you through the claims and connections exactly as he presents them in his work. So Jonathan kicks off his entire investigation with a really simple question. How good is too good? You know the feeling, right? When something seems just a little too perfect, like an investment firm that somehow never loses money, or a tech company that always knows what we need before we do. He's basically saying that when something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And that single suspicion, that's the thread he starts to pull. And this leads us right to the central thesis of his entire body of work. At its core, he alleges there's a hidden, coordinated power structure, and its goal, he claims, is to actively undermine the United States. His words are strong here. He believes the endgame is to turn the U.S. into what he calls a vassal slave state that serves foreign interests. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to break this down into 5 key sections from his documents. We'll start with Aladdin, move to Eric Schmidt, then the Johns Hopkins Network, the COVID-19 allegations, and finally wrap up with his call to action. Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, Aladdin. According to Jonathan, this isn't just some financial software. He calls it the financial engine, maybe even the ultimate weapon, right at the center of this whole network. So what is Aladdin? Well, you might know it as a BlackRock platform for managing risk, but Jonathan's description goes way beyond that. He paints a picture of it as a weapon, a system built for global financial manipulation, market control, and what he calls predictive warfare. In his view, this thing is designed for total global control. And just look at the capabilities he attributes to this thing. We're talking about preemptively wargaming major events, predicting the social, political, and even biological costs of things with what he calls frightening accuracy. He claims it's used for manipulating global markets, front-running trades, and even laying the groundwork for central bank digital currencies. It's a pretty staggering list. Okay, so to build his case, Jonathan doesn't just look at the tech, he looks at the people behind the tech, and he zooms in on Aladdin's co-creator, a Dr. Bennett Golub. Jonathan's research claims that Golub has been running something called the BlackRock UJA Federation program since day one, and he alleges that the specific organization is actually a front from Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. All right, that brings us to the second major pillar of Jonathan's research, tech infiltration. And the key figure he identifies here is a big one. Former Google CEO, Eric Schmidt. So Jonathan asks a pretty provocative question. Who is Eric Schmidt really? He suggests that the public story we all know, the tech genius, the innovator, doesn't quite capture the full picture. In Jonathan's view, Schmidt isn't just a successful executive. He's a strategically placed operative. And he doesn't mince words. Jonathan calls him, and I'm quoting here, the world heavyweight champion of anti-America Trojan horses ever to grace a Silicon Valley tech startup. So yeah, he uses some incredibly strong language to frame his argument that Schmidt's whole career was a calculated move to infiltrate America's most critical tech infrastructure. And his documents lay out a very specific career path to back this up. He points to Schmidt's time back in the 80s as CTO at Sun Microsystems, which interestingly is where he says Aladdin's creators also came from. Then, of course, his time as chairman and CEO of Google. After that, in 2010, he co-founds a company called Innovation Endeavors with someone Jonathan alleges is a former officer from Israel's elite Unit 8200. And finally, his post-Google work on the Department of Defense Innovation Board. Jonathan presents this whole timeline as evidence of a long-term strategic plan. Okay, so we have finance and we have tech. The next piece of the puzzle, according to Jonathan's work, is connecting these individuals to a wider ideological network. And he claims the hub for this network is a major academic institution, Johns Hopkins University. So how does he make that connection? Well, the first link he points to is both financial and familial. He notes that Eric Schmidt himself established a professorship at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, or SIZE. It's called the Wilson E. Schmidt Distinguished Professorship, and it's named after his own father, who was a professor there. From there, he starts digging into the legacy of the people associated with that specific school. He points out that it's named for Paul H. Knights, who, as Jonathan notes, was a principal architect of America's Cold War defense policy. We're talking about someone with incredibly deep ties to the U.S. State and Defense Departments. And the web, as Jonathan lays it out, just keeps expanding. He then connects Johns Hopkins to another really influential think tank, the Aspen Institute.
And how? Through Paul Nitz's family ties. His brother-in-law founded it. Jonathan calls the Aspen Institute a treasonous organization and alleges that it is all part of the same network.
And this is a really great illustration of Jonathan's whole method. He's connecting powerful families to influential institutions and then to specific political agendas. He traces the current leadership of the Aspen Institute to the Pritzker family, and then he links them to various pro-Israel and globalist causes that he claims are central to this whole thing. This all brings us to Section 4, and this is where we get into some of the most serious allegations in Jonathan's entire research. It all centers on the COVID-19 pandemic, which he claims was a planned event and a manufactured crisis.
So, as key evidence for this claim of premeditation, he points to something called Event 201. This was a high-level pandemic simulation exercise hosted by, you guessed it, Johns Hopkins, along with some partners. And what was the simulation about? A coronavirus outbreak. And when did it happen? Just a few weeks before the first actual cases of COVID-19 were reported. He then alleges that the crisis itself was used to carry out a massive, multifaceted operation. And the claims here are intense. He alleges it was a mass-scale eugenics operation targeting non-Jews. He talks about fraudulent denial of insurance benefits to force people into toxic treatments, withholding cheap drugs like hydroxychloroquine, and even harvesting organs from patients and collecting life insurance on them. Now, a really crucial point here is that Jonathan isn't just making these broad, sweeping claims. His research actually names specific individuals at companies like United Health and Tempus AI, as well as people in government health agencies who he alleges were complicit in this scheme. So after laying out this incredibly intricate web of connections, from finance to tech to academia to healthcare, Jonathan doesn't just end with an analysis. He concludes his documents with a very direct and urgent call to action for his readers. And as part of that conclusion, he brings in another huge piece: election integrity. He presents screenshots from what he calls forensic tools, and he claims these screenshots are, in his words, irrefutable proof of election fraud, which he says was orchestrated by this very same network we've been talking about. So in his final analysis, these things aren't just a bunch of random, disparate events. The financial power of Aladdin, the tech infiltration through Schmidt, the network at Johns Hopkins, the COVID pandemic, the election fraud claims. Jonathan asserts these are not coincidences. He argues they are all part of one single coordinated effort to turn the U.S. into a vassal slave state. And so he ends his work with this quote, not with a question, but with a plea. He says, "The hour is much later than you think. And though we are winning and we will win, it won't be possible without all of us standing humbly yet courageously together in total solidarity against our common enemy." He really frames his research as a final warning and a call for people to unite based on what he's uncovered. And that concludes our explainer of Jonathan's research documents.